I'm Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Clean up your damn room. Stand up straight with your shoulders back and listen to the Patrick Coffin Show.
What the bleep happened to Ireland? How did the land of saints and scholars become the land of a homosexual prime minister and all kinds of moral chaos? We're going to analyze the beautiful country of Ireland and take its temperature, what's happening this generation, especially in light of the upcoming May 25th vote, the referendum vote on the 8th Amendment to the Irish Constitution. So much at stake, so much on the line. We're going to talk about it today, straight ahead on The Patrick Coffin Show. Glad to have you aboard. This is The Patrick Coffin Show. Today's guest is John Waters, Irish journalist, playwright, and social critic. You may have read his books Beyond Consolation, Jiving at the Crossroads, and Lapsed Agnostic, and many others. He joins us now from Dublin. John, thanks for being with us. Appreciate your time.
Pleasure, Patrick. Nice to talk to you.
You write like a dream. You're just such a mellifluous, funny, insightful writer. Did you always want to do this? Were you a natural-born storyteller from a kid?
I wanted to be a writer. Journalism was the most immediate form of writing that I came across, and there were certain journalists in Irish newspapers that I loved and read there all the time, and that was my dream, not to be able to write in newspapers. But that was a long time ago, and newspapers have changed, and some of them don't any longer exist. So
that's right.
Yeah,
and you're also a chronicler of rock music. You sort of went in hot press waters. In the Irish rock scene. Mm-hmm.
Started off with Hot Press, which was Ireland's leading rock and roll magazine. In fact, it was Ireland's only rock and roll magazine. It was a fortnightly publication. Keeping Ireland safe for rock and roll was the strapline,
Mm-hmm.
So
mm-hmm.
That was in the 80s I started. In fact, the late 70s I wrote my first article, and that was my whole thing. I've been grounded in that, and I still feel that. I still feel part of that whole musical culture, and going back to the blues and all that, but the ideological end of that has moved in a totally different direction to me, and that kind of disturbs me a little bit because it seems to have become dislocated from its roots.
Yeah. Now, U2 seems to be a good example of two bookends. The U2, when they were young and hungry and scared, they had the fear of God in them, they want to make a big splash, to the U2 of today, kind of bloated, almost like Elvis without the weight gain. You've been a regular contributor to First Things, and I always appreciate your musings there. What happened to U2? They just kind of, we're going to get to the Eighth Amendment and so on, but coming out on behalf of abortion is very surprising for a band that's always been subliminally, when not explicitly, Christian.
Yeah, they started off as being this extraordinarily naive band that kind of fell from outer space because they didn't really belong to any tradition, or they didn't seem to have any training, but they had this enormous kind of instinct and a collective kind of energy that was greater than the sum of its parts. And, they just blurted out the truth every time, and they didn't seem to care how they sounded, and they didn't have alliances, and they didn't seek to make friends with anybody. They just sought to play their music and be heard and to conquer the world, which they did. But then I think what happened to them was that they fell in love with the idea of being at the top of the charts, at the top of the league, and became terrified of losing that position. So they turned into, instead of actually branching out musically, and there were moments when it looked like they might do that,
mm-hmm.
they started to kind of come in on themselves and started to go into self-pastiche, and they grew inward. And I think also that as they grew up, that sense of cohesion in the four disintegrated as they went their separate ways. And it was almost, I think, for many years now, they've simply turned up for work and played together. But that energy that was once greater than the sum of its parts is no longer there. It left them. And so they're kind of trying to recreate, to repiece together that kind of energy and that creativity that they had in the beginning. But in fact, it's failing. And if you were to listen to any of the latest albums, and in fact, I would say the last 5 or 6 albums, I think you would have to say that there's actually nothing on those albums that would have made them anything like they became had they brought it out in the beginning.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy of U2. And so out of that, they've huddled up to the existing rock and roll culture, which in the beginning rejected them. Now they want to be approved by it. They want to get good reviews. They want to be written up in Rolling Stone. They want all this stuff. And that's compromised them, because it's a bizarre thing about rock and roll. Music that started in the blues, from the chants of the slaves across the plantations, and which became songs eventually in the blues. Ideologically, as that music was adopted by Western society, Western culture, it has moved away, so far away from that, as to be now supporting. Most bands feel they're, ideologically and otherwise obliged to support the right to choose, which means, of course, the right to choose children, to kill children. And I always say, well, this is the new slavery, because just as slavery is, the buying of the convenience of one person with the life of another, so is abortion. So is abortion. And so there's only one place for a rock and roller to stand, any more than there is only one place for a Christian to stand, and that is with the unborn child. And anybody who doesn't see that, I don't know what they see. So that's kind of, because they are compromised and drawn into this culture of ideological, coherence or cohesion, consensus, they're now, I think, seriously, irrelevant.
Well, if they want to stand out as they did in the beginning, then standing in the tradition of what's the best way to put it? In the tradition of rebellion against norms that are not moral, namely standing on the side of the slave, on the side of the heart and the source of the roots of blues music, you'd think they would identify with the victim, and the victim here is the unborn.
That's right,
but they're totally sold out. Yeah,
because U2 were always rebellious, but it wasn't the kind of ideological rebelliousness of, say, the Clash or the Sex Pistols or those bands. It was an existential rebelliousness. It was like it was about the human soul in reality. And that was what their songs were all about. And their songs in that context, they were Christians, and in some ways they perhaps were a little bit simplistically Christian in the beginning. They saw this, they were very, very much immersed in this born again Christian strain in Dublin. And in the beginning, this caused them huge problems, because they were sneered at by the rock cognoscenti, up to the third album, War. And they went away and they reinvented themselves, and they treated this whole thing to a kind of a coating of irony, particularly in Achtung Baby. And that disguise allowed them to survive in a culture that would have been hostile to them otherwise, even though fundamentally it has to be said that the music and the lyrical content of their songs had not changed, and still hasn't changed. I mean, to give credit, like someone like Bono, he's a man of an extraordinary intelligence, I think. I'm not in any way slagging Bono off or saying these guys are bad people, but I'm just saying that they need to pay attention to what they were, and not pay attention to all the kind of acolytes and all the kind of ideological stooges who have adopted them and try to manage them and try to run them in the modern rock and roll circus that we're kind of so wrapped up in, and because they're better than that. And there have been moments when they could have branched off and taken a risk. I think in particular, I wrote my first Things piece about this one particular song in pop, which is "Wake Up, Dead Man," which is like a cry, like you're starting an argument with God. It's where the hell are you? Come on, get up. We need you. And it's an amazing song. And that could have taken them off in a totally new direction. But it didn't do so good, that album. And they steered back into the mainstream and tried to rediscover that kind of essence of themselves, which of course they could no longer create spontaneously. And they just sort of put it together by numbers. And they're still doing that, in my opinion. Ironically, they're probably commercially much more successful now than ever they've been, so nobody cares. But that's another symptom of the problem.
I've noticed a blowback. There was a big blowback on Twitter of disenfranchised, heartbroken U2 fans when Bono and Edge. I love your statement. Yes, repealing the Eighth Amendment. It's a smart thing to do. Like
that's what Edge said. Smart. I think he was giving tip on a horse.
Buy IBM stock.
Yeah, no, in the 230 at Epsom. It's a smart thing to do. Is a good bet.
Yeah. I was in Galway 3 years ago, a part of a Catholic pilgrimage, and I spent about 6 hours a night by the time I was in Galway in pubs doing magic. I'm a close-up magician as well, and we'd gather a little crowd around, and it would open the doors to a conversation about faith and the transcendent and history and miracles and that kind of thing. And one young Irishman, a law student, really sharp guy, said to me about the departure from the Catholic faith of his generation. He said, we're out from under the authority of the Catholic Church, but we don't know whose authority we're under now.
Yeah.
Which kind of, I think, spoke for that generation. There's this anti-law, anti-authority spirit, and yet, where's the next? Who's your master? Now who's your Lord? Now what? And I listened and read of the things that the writer Nuala Foillon said about her own demise. She was dying of cancer, and she was terrified of dying, and she's kind of a symbol to me of an Ireland that lost its transcendent mooring somehow. That Irishness alone is not enough to save you, despite all the gifts and so on. The lack of faith has led to a certain nihilism and ennui, existential meaninglessness. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. I mean, that would be true, and I mean, she would have been, an iconic figure in Ireland from the 1960s, when that's, burst for freedom as a writer, as a journalist, and radio producer, and all that. Really at the center of the feminist kind of upsurge that happened in the 70s here. Yep. And so I mean, the story there was that she was diagnosed with cancer back in 2008. Terminal cancer, and she was absolutely distraught, and went on radio and did an interview, a long interview, which really, with her friend, Marion Finucane, a longtime friend, and this interview really gripped the nation, because clearly she was terrified of death and absolutely heartbroken, and had nothing to cling on to, or seemed to have nothing to cling on to, and rejected faith and rejected everything that. And yet I wrote a book out of that idea called Beyond Consolation. And what I was trying to say was that actually, if you listen carefully to Nuala, you kind of hear that she's saying things that we all need to say, that we need something, and that maybe there's a way of seeing this, that it is different, but will somebody tell me, and will somebody show me? Because, the language of faith has become hugely problematic, particularly in Ireland, because, the language of piety and so on, is to some extent kind of, I won't say discredited, but it sort of belongs to an area of life which is now being attacked all the time, and it's very difficult to kind of speak of it to one another. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a real problem that she articulated. And so I wanted to get to the bottom of that question, to answer fundamentally the question: is this a reasonable proposition, that there is nothing, there is no hope, and that I should just fear death and all the loss of all love, all everything, and is that everything? And I don't believe this, but I didn't even know what I was going to write until I wrote it, and I wrote this exploration, this meditation, as it were, on what she said. And so, I think this is really true. We're at a crossroads in Irish culture, or maybe we've passed through that crossroads, where, that sense of a simple notion of authority and of truth has been taken from us.
And identified with authoritarianism in the case of Ireland?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Lots of sexual morality, very little Jesus Christ as someone you'd want to fall in love with.
That's exactly right, Patrick. That's exactly the problem. I mean, okay, well, the problem, you could make it a little bit more complicated by saying that what happened in Ireland with the church was that a certain kind of sociological role was foisted upon the church by circumstances after the famines of the 1840s, where you had kind of like this obliteration of pretty much half the population. And that was to some extent down to like the licentiousness of the population up to that. Of course, the potato had something to do with it, and the whole colonization of Ireland, and the ethnic cleansing ethic that was driving the whole British government's view of Ireland at the time, and all those things. But nevertheless, there was a kind of a moral breakdown, and I think the church took it upon itself to ensure that this would not happen again, and therefore became highly moralistic and highly to do with closing down the sensual dimensions of humanity in Ireland. And that became a strain in Catholicism, which probably much, much stronger than anywhere else in the world, really caused an awful lot of damage. The second thing that happened was that when we became independent, Pádraig Pearse, the leader of the 1916 Rising, wrote a great essay a couple of years beforehand, called The Murder Machine, which was about the English education system in Ireland. And he talked about that the purpose of this was to turn out slaves. And this was the greatest killing machine that ever had been invented, killing because it killed the spirits of men and women.
Yeah.
And that's what happened after independence, was that blindly, of course, one of the things that happened that Pádraig Pearse ended up in a pool of blood in Kilmainham jail, in the yard of Kilmainham jail on May the 3rd, 1916. And that was the end of his intelligence and his understanding of our situation. And so the Catholic Church then moved in and essentially co-opted the British education system and continued. And one of the symptoms of that was that it separated out everything. Science was here, English literature was here, mathematics was here, and religion was here.
All separate silos.
Yes. So the idea of transcendence, which is the most essential element, in my opinion, Patrick, of the human understanding, the human imagination, a sense of transcendence, became lost. It was objectified. And so what has actually happened now is that religion in schools is essentially, which is the end product of that, is essentially the history of superstition. This is what those people believed. This is what those people believe. Right. This is what your grandparents believe. Make up your own mind. And so this is like a nihilistic kind of culture that is developing in Ireland, which, is also in America, it's also in Britain, but it's actually quite different in Ireland for the reason that the intense dislike and enmity towards the Catholic Church is driving this aggressively in a way that's not happening anywhere else, or very few other places. So that's why we have gone from one extreme to the other in such a short time. Because in fact, what was once the strength of our religious culture is now its greatest enemy.
It's very interesting. I see a parallel with Quebec in Ireland. In the 1920s, Quebec had the highest birth rate in the world. I wrote a book about this called The Contraception Deception. And Quebec in the 20s, the idea was, it's a French phrase. In English, it's revenge of the cradle. These French Canadian Catholics, surrounded by an ocean of Anglos, mainly English and Protestant, they wanted to fight back without arms, but through the sheer weight of numbers. And so fertility rates were unbelievable. Very, very normal to see families with 10 to 15 children. That was not a weird thing. But then slowly in the 1950s, actually 1960s, considered the beginning of the Quiet Revolution. You had bishops from pulpits telling Catholics how to vote. There was a lot of political inbreeding between church leadership and the political sphere. Now Quebec has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, and knee-jerk contempt for the Catholic Church there as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of the pattern, and our birth rate is still holding up a little compared to other European countries, but it's also sliding, and of course, if we were, God forbid, to bring in abortion, you could see that it would absolutely go through the floor.
100%. Well, people don't see it this way. They see it as, and I've listened to enough Irish commentators, they want to tag the abortion debate as a purely religious dogma. The faith teaches that, but we're men of science, and we're more balanced and reasonable. But your approach is not to invoke Bible, Jesus, council, Pope, but common sense. What is a human right? When does human life begin? If it begins the moment of birth, well, that doesn't make sense, because what is viable in the Arctic region in a remote town is not the same thing as a hospital in Dublin or London or what have you. And therefore, if we want to support human life and its most vulnerable and weakest, of course we have to be on the side of the unborn. John, what's the phrase in Irish, in Gaelic for unborn children? Because the linguistic thing there is fascinating.
Yes, in the Constitution, it says "na meo gan bre," which actually means literally in English, the living without birth, which is an amazingly beautiful phrase, and that compared to the English language version of our Constitution, which just says the unborn. It doesn't even say unborn child. It just says unborn. Unborn is an adjective. It isn't actually. It's in that sense that the wording of Article 40.3.3, which is that issue here in this referendum, is somewhat flawed. But that's a side issue compared to the totemic significance of this article now. It is the last bulwark in Irish constitutional law. Of the rights of the unborn child, and therefore, regardless of what we feel about some imperfection in the wording, it's got to be defended. But na meo gan bre, the living without birth. I mean, this is exactly how we've always felt about children. You know what I mean? Like I tell people around the country, my stepdaughter, Sarah, is pregnant with her second child, and his one child already called Abigail, who's 3 1/3. And I tell people about this, and that I was asking Abigail, when we discovered that it was going to be a boy, what are you going to call your brother? And she said Tom, which is not a very fashionable name these days, but I don't know where she got it from. Her creche, I think one of her friends there was called Tom, so she liked him that way. So I call him Tom now, And what I say to people is, like, he comes to me in my dreams. I see him. I actually see him in my dreams. And then I say to Rita, my wife, when we're out, there he is. There's Tom. And this is the way it always was. Patrick. This is children entered into our imaginations the very minute we heard of the possibility of their existence. And yet our politicians and our lawyers and judges try to tell us that it was somehow otherwise.
Yeah.
That we didn't see things like this, that we saw things as clumps of cells, and we didn't consider these as maybe a bird would fly out there, or maybe a mouse would emerge. I don't know, like craziness that take seriously. So the result is, Patrick, that for the last couple of months now in Ireland, we've been engaged in this absolutely fatuous and obscene discussion about things that we should not be contemplating. The idea of striking down the rights of a category of human person, because that's what it means, that actually, for the first time, as far as I know, Patrick, this will be the first time, if it happens, God forbid, it will be the first time in human history that a population had actually voted to annihilate a section of itself. Not even the Nazis succeeded in that.
Yeah, this is, I'm seeing a kind of an echo here. Now, obviously, I wanted to do this interview, John, before the vote, because I want this to go as viral as we can. I've got friends in Ireland, and I'd love to have it shared widely from people with an open mind, who don't have any particular religious viewpoint, or maybe they do, maybe they don't. But I see an echo with this referendum vote to the 2015 vote to redefine marriage. I was really stunned to learn that 63% of voters voted to redefine it. And they were the people who did not want to redefine marriage, the people who wanted to keep the definition of marriage as it's been defined publicly for 4,000 years, which predates Christianity and predates Judaism. They were saddled from a PR point of view with selling a no. They had to sort of be on the side of the negative. And there's something similar here. And I don't know if the average Irish voter sees this as radical as it really is. Unlike Roe v. Wade, which was a Supreme Court decision, this is something that the people have in their own hands to determine the future of how many more Irish will be allowed into this world. Because if it goes the wrong way, goodbye Irish fertility. It only takes 3 generations to go absolutely out. And once it's like it's a train going slowly up a mountain. Yeah, the train's going forward, it's not going backwards, but there is a point of no return.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is a long-winded way of saying when so much money poured in from American liberal organizations to redefine Irish marriage, no one seemed to complain. But Google and YouTube are banning ads in favor of life. It seems like a complete double standard. The influx of cash and assistance from the outside when it's something politically correct or favorable is treated very differently from when something's not going the way of the elites and the chattering classes, especially in the media.
Yeah, well, there's a lot in what you've said there, Patrick, and you've covered a lot of ground. And I want to, there are several kind of common strands which come together in a certain condition that I would identify in the Irish personality, which you might call kind of, for want of a better phrase, post-colonial, deference. That there is a condition in a culture like Ireland which doesn't realise that it's post-colonial, doesn't realise that that's a pathology that other people have, suffered, and that has certain inevitable consequences, which were written up probably most effectively by Dr. Frantz Fanon in Algeria in the civil war there in the 1950s and early 60s, 61. Mm-hmm. He wrote the great book, The Wretched of the Earth, where he talks about all of these pathologies. And one of those pathologies is mimicry, and also that he says the first thing that a colonizer does in a new territory is to impress upon the mind of the native that before the advent of colonialism, there was nothing but barbarism. Mm-hmm. And once you've done that, you've convinced you can leave, because the people colonized themselves, because they hate themselves and want to change themselves to be like you, to imitate and this is the fundamental condition of modern Ireland. The reason that we take on gay marriage is not because we like gay people particularly, or indeed that we like abortion in this case. It's that we think this is a symptom of modernity.
Yes.
And we want to announce to the world that we are the most modern country in the world ever. That is our kind of, and people take great pride in this stupid idea that, we are cool in the world, and the fact that Google and Facebook have their European offices in Dublin seems to mean an awful lot to some people, even though these people are really just totalitarian organizations which are intent upon running the world and have no interest in democracy and no interest in freedom whatsoever. So people are, I think, what happened in 2015 really was that Ireland was bullied into acquiescing in the gay marriage proposal by people who were really, I think, some of the nastiest actors in Irish political life for a very, very long time, perhaps since the Black and Tans left nearly a century ago. And this is really nasty stuff. And they demonize anybody who dared even question their proposal, never mind oppose it.
Yeah.
And same people are now involved in this abortion thing because they're ideologically of the same platform. And so, but I detect, Patrick, that there's something different going on. I was involved in both campaigns, and that was a no-win situation because, to be defending something as dry as the Constitution against the, idea of love, which is how it's presented, is it's a pretty sticky wicket to be batting on.
Yep.
But to be protecting babies is a different matter. And I've been out since last October on this one. I've been speaking all over the country, and I've met many people and canvassers. We talked a lot to canvassers to kind of, whip them up into a sense of, anger and enthusiasm for going out onto the doorsteps. And I'm hearing back from them that very good things. So I think certainly I would have said that over the last two referendums, we had one in 2012 as well about so-called children's rights. And we won that. We'd lost that one, but it was a high 42%. In 2015, we got 38%. That's tell you, there's give or take about 40% of the Irish people who are permanently still awake.
Permanently what?
Still awake. They're still not hypnotized by propaganda. They're not intimidated. They're not brainwashed. They're not.
They haven't adopted the commands of their oppressors.
That's right. And a lot of these, in a certain sense, Ireland is no longer a democracy, it's a corporatocracy, because we use this, our only industry, our only real instrument in our economy now, worth anything, is our low corporation tax, which brings all these people in. They're just basically tax tourists, these corporations. But when they come in here, they start to dictate to our government, and our government, being very weak-minded people in general, acquiesce and give in to everything. And, that's why you actually have people like the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, and his deputy Simon Coveney, and the Minister for Health Simon Harris, all of whom were, when last they were asked, pro-life. Within literally almost hours or days of going into high office, they had, 360 degrees about turn, and they're now promoting abortion in effect up to 9 months, because bill which is camouflaging the reality of the situation, because this will be the bill which will be enacted and says up to 12 weeks and different other provisions. But in reality, the that being put into the Constitution will make abortion a fundamental human right for the first time in human history. You don't even have that in the United States.
Yeah, nor Canada.
No. Yeah. So for the first time in human history, that's what I mean. We always want to do it the best. I mean, our gay marriage is the best gay marriage in the world ever. It's in our Constitution. A gay couple is now the equivalent of a man and a woman with a child. And they have the same rights. And then they, in fact, have superior rights to single fathers or any group like that. So, we're intent upon doing all that the modern ideologies demand of us in order to show that we're not, in fact, barbarous.
Yeah. Yeah, flips and twists to appear almost with superpowers of that platform, that worldview.
You throw us a ball, we'll catch it. No matter what it is, we will. If you challenge us to show that we're modern, you just define the terms and we'll go for it.
Yeah,
that's. And that's the idiocy now that leads to, you asked at the beginning, how do we end up with a man whose only qualification for the office is that he's gay, is our Prime Minister, is our Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar. That's his only qualification. That's why he's there.
Well, that's a superpower now.
He's there because he's gay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's his only asset. He has no intelligence. He has no wisdom. He has no vision. He has nothing except and his homosexuality.
And also a product of Catholic education, correct? It's sort of the cherry on top.
Yeah, but Catholic education is kind of almost like an oxymoron at this point. I mean, if you actually go into these schools, what you realize is that actually the teachers don't actually believe in anything. Most of the teachers are teaching ideologies that are nothing to do with Catholicism, and they have, in fact, as I say, what they teach in the form of religion is really the history of superstition. Mm-hmm. Honestly, that's what it is. That's what they teach, and so we're in serious trouble. We're in big, big trouble in Ireland. But it's the kind of trouble that's waiting for the world now, because all of these ideologies come from the destruction of the spiritual sense of human. Yeah. And we're now in an entirely material world, and everything is measured materially. And that's why you have the possibility, the unthinkable possibility that people now really seem to entertain, that if you're being told that your child might be in the slightest bit disabled, then you just kill that child and get on with your life. That is barbaric. That is barbarism. But so that's going to come true.
Isn't that the irony? That's the irony of that self-fulfilling prophecy: escaping barbarism by becoming barbarous.
That's right. That's exactly what happens. And
I don't know if it's a phrase you coined or a word that you repeated. I'd never heard it before. I wanted to ask you about moralosis, which you wrote about in First Things.
I put that one up, Patrick, because I was trying to counteract another word, which was moralism, which has been thrown at me quite a lot in recent years, particularly by Catholics.
Yeah.
And who want to jump on these bandwagons because they're scared to be, shouted down by the LGBT mob or whatever it is. And when I sign up to those people, they say, "Oh, you're a moralistic Catholic. You're not interested in Jesus. You're only interested in morals.
You're not nice. You're just a finger pointer."
Yeah. And I say, well, actually, what you're actually saying, I say to them, I know what you're actually saying is that you can have Jesus without morals. And I don't think that's true, because I think if Jesus was here, he'd be kicking ass as well on these questions. I'm certain he would.
Well, he didn't debate and have a disquisition in the temple with the moneylenders.
No, he just kicked ass. He kicked tables, and that famous line he said, when he said, let the dead bury the dead. That wasn't a nice thing to say in a way by our pious, modern, kind of compassionate Christians.
Yeah, it's not very Christian.
But he said it, and I know what he meant, and that kind of guy I like.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's not afraid of hyperbole, right?
No, and you see, this is, I think, a real problem in modern Catholicism, that in the attempt to kind of reconcile Catholicism with this changing modern world, that rather than actually continuing to critique that world, the Church is trying to find some kind of accommodation with these kind of ideologies, which of course is to self deconstruct, because the Church, the argument they keep using is that this will keep the Church popular and it will keep the Church, it will attract people if we're more compassionate and more, but it actually won't. And even if it did, it wouldn't any longer be the Church anyway. So there's no point in it. One of the things that attracted me to Pope Benedict in the very beginning, before he became Pope Benedict, when he was still Cardinal Ratzinger, I remember actually just hearing a half phrase from him one day, which really clarified things for me. And I can't remember the beginning or the end of the sentence, but it was like in between two commas. And the phrase was, the Church, expert in humanity, comma. And I thought, wow, that's what it is.
Yeah.
This is what the Church is. It's a repository of wisdom through the ages. It teaches us what truth is. Yeah. It retains the truth and continues to articulate it. This is the purpose of the Church in the world, one of the main purposes of the Church in the world. And so I started to pay more attention after that to a lot of stuff. I already had been paying quite a bit of attention because I'm a bit of a long saga of kind of journeying away and returning and, under the lash of alcohol and coming back to God reluctantly, but still saying, okay, I'm open, I'm waiting. I'll say, then testing it, and then, finding that actually in those years I'd been away, I kind of seemed to have maybe discovered a lot of things that didn't fit into with the kind of aspirations I set out with, So that kind of brought me back into looking at this more kind of squarely. And so I started to read up on John Paul II and Ratzinger and these guys. And I had to say after a while, these guys aren't wrong about everything. They know a thing or two.
Yeah. That's a fair summary, isn't it? Expert in humanity, fallen nature and the role of grace and human intellect and the riches of the Catholic intellectual tradition, which is completely, millennials have no idea what they have departed from.
One of the big problems, Patrick, is that, in the modern world, very few people are honest about their own experiences. I mean, any of us who grew out of the 60s, as I did, and experienced that freedom, and sort of were kind of drunk on its promise, if we're honest and look back, we have to say it did not fulfill us, or it did not fulfill is promise to us.
Yeah.
And that's the honest answer, and that's been my experience. I wrote my book, Lapsed Agnostic, which is essentially saying that. But people are not honest about that. And so the same idea is being sold through generation upon generation, even though those who lived through it know in their hearts that it doesn't work. And so we're actually imposing, a sentence of, years upon years of misunderstanding and confusion upon our own children, rather than actually stand up straight and say, actually, it didn't work for me. That freedom doesn't work. There is another kind of freedom that you need to think about. And that's what the church is saying. But now I kind of think sometimes I worry the church is not saying this coherently or consistently enough.
You would think, contrasting St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict, former Cardinal Ratzinger, with Pope Francis, there's a disconnect in my mind. So let me tease it out, and you can agree or disagree. The press despised John Paul II. He was the authoritarian, anti-woman Polish guy. Cardinal Ratzinger was the Panzer Cardinal, right? God's Rottweiler. Unfortunately, I've met both men by unmerited grace, and they are the exact opposite of the media stereotype. And here comes Pope Francis with the emphasis on mercy and accompaniment. And I'm not seeing the Francis effect on the ground generating a springtime. I don't know how the last 5 years have affected church leadership in Ireland, but there's like, where's the beef? There's no, if the Irish, like the Canadians and people here, because people are essentially the same, we're all children of Adam and Eve, if they want an emphasis less on authoritarian, less on justice and truth, and more on mercy, it doesn't seem to have produced much practical effect in a positive way. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense, Patrick. I mean, I particularly look back to the time of Pope Benedict with great affection, because he seemed to me, and as you say, I never met him, but I could see by his demeanor and talking to people who met him that he was a man of extraordinary grace and gentleness. He was presented as this oak in the media who constantly misrepresented his every word, and I did numerous, as a journalist, I did numerous investigations of, these sudden, Pope condemns homosexuals in Spain. And then, of course, he wouldn't even have mentioned homosexuals. They would have misunderstood what he said, but all the newspapers would have the same headlines.
Yeah.
And then, but you see, then this new narrative came up, new Pope, new hope, when Francis came along, which was like like that. The image of Pope Francis was refracted through the prism of the media and presented as being something completely wonderful and benign. But it actually is a very confusing thing, because it was implied that he could make all these changes and was going to make all these changes. And of course, he has made no changes in that way at all, because he can't.
Because he can't, yeah.
And yet the journalists continue to spin this kind of cuddly Pope, who really, I think, has confused many people, particularly Catholics, faithful Catholics, who are now being told that actually it is possible to be too Catholic and too intensely believing in the teachings of the church, that you have to be a little bit relaxed about all that and not kind of really think about it that seriously. And that's really distressing for many people. And the result is, as you say, that this strange thing that everybody told us, that the journalists told us, that this would result in a resurgence of the church and that people would rush back to church. The direct opposite has happened. Apparently the numbers in St. Peter's Square for the Pope's appearances have dwindled significantly since Pope Benedict. Because Pope Benedict was seen as a man who spoke the truth unequivocally and totally. He didn't seek to appease. He didn't seek to, but he was gentle, and he explained it to his children that this is how you have to live your life if you want to be happy, if you want to have a peaceful life, a real life, a life that is characterized by true freedom. And this was a great gift for us to know that actually that path we'd been on, which had confused us so much, had been the wrong path, and this was a better path. And we tried it, and we found that that was the case. But this guy seems to be trying to put us back on the old path again. I don't know exactly what's going on. I don't want to be too critical of Pope Francis because, I'm sure he has many things to say. But one of the things I would say about him is that he is, by talking consistently to a certain category of journalists, usually to secular atheists, seems to have deliberately set a kind of a false trail of expectation concerning what he is capable of delivering to certain interests. And in general, they seem to be the interests which are hostile to the church. I mean, I met a woman, and this is kind of puts it about as starkly as you could possibly. I met a female politician in Italy, there in Rome there a couple of years ago, and we were talking about this, and she's a faithful Catholic, and she said, this is a great pope, she said. This is a great pope for non-Catholics. And that about says it.
Well, and to balance that, which I don't disagree, but he's also become the mascot of the media. They want to make him into their own image and likeness and say what he wants them to say. If you read the actual text of what Pope Francis says, he goes through life being misquoted constantly. I got in a lot of trouble on Twitter because I said Pope Francis seems to be in some ways the Trump of the left. By which I didn't mean, to compare an American president with the Vicar of Christ. I wasn't talking about doctrine at all. I was talking about the way he's perceived, the way both men subvert the expectations of their followers. They've both kind of jettisoned previous ways of doing things, and they're both kind of divisive in their own ways. But I agree. I mean, so you see, I would say the core problem I would have is that he never actually corrects when he's misrepresented. He never intervenes to say, no, that's not what I said. You're misquoting me. And that's happened innumerable times. I mean, if you look back at the famous "Who am I to judge" statement, which was in a very specific situation referring to a very specific person, and yet it's translated into a T-shirt. That's right. We're going to be dealing with it for decades.
Yeah. So, and he never said, no, you've misunderstood that. I was talking about a specific situation. This is what I was talking about. Please do not do this with my words. That's what I would have said if I were the Pope, which I will never be, obviously.
Good Pope John. We're running down here on our time together, John, and I've just enjoyed it so much. I wanted to ask you about signs of hope in Ireland with respect to the amendment. I've heard from a couple of people that I know on the old sod who are going door to door with great success. When a human being meets you in eye contact and you show them some scientific facts about the life of the unborn and what's at stake, there's a light bulb goes off because there's no media filter, there's no political agenda. It's just the scientific facts and about humanity and about making Ireland, I won't say making Ireland great again, but stopping the demographic bleed so that we have more Irish men and women in the world, not fewer. Do you think this actually has a chance of passing?
Right now, we have a week to go, Patrick, and I do believe so. And I'll tell you why. I think that, our young people have been got to by a terrible education system, by corrupt media, by social media, by ideology. They're unreachable. They've been hypnotized. The word repeal is like a neuro-linguistic trigger word, that sort of sets them off into a kind of a frenzy, like if they're hypnotized and they're running around the place searching for leprechauns until you click your finger and they stop again, But where I see the whole, I've been going out for about 6 months now, and you might, and the yes side sneer at the kind of the no meetings because they're mainly older people, and I say, they're the people who know. They're the people who have paid attention to all these important things. And the children have been taken for the moment, most of them, not all of them, but many of them. And so I say to the people that I speak to, it's up to us now. We have to save our country this one time. And then after that, when we have saved this, when we have stopped this in its tracks, we have to go back for those young people and rescue them from this poison. Because without that, our country is doomed anyway, because they'll just come back in 5 years anyway or less and do the same thing again. We have to now get rid of the Leo Varadkars, get rid of our present media, demand that they, our national broadcaster. I've been telling people, why does we have the same national broadcaster for 60 years? Can we not put this up for tender now? Ask them to prove to us that you actually really represent the Irish people. All of these things I've been insisting that we do after this. But I believe right at this moment, Patrick, that it is now moving in our way. With a huge surge. It's like a tsunami of energy, rage coming from older people saying, no, you will not. This is not our country. We will not allow this to happen. We will not have the smoke of burning human flesh seen on the horizon of Ireland anytime soon.
And the only vote that matters is not the polls. It's that referendum vote is the only poll that matters.
That's the only poll that matters. Not more than anything that has happened in my lifetime, this matters.
Closing thought, John. My tagline at the end of the show is "Be a saint. What else is there?" Ireland is not best known for James Joyce or Oscar Wilde or Frank McCourt. Ireland is known and loved around the world because of one man, Saint Patrick. Yeah, I'm not saying because I am a Patrick. Do you believe that the answer to the crisis, political and social and sexual and all the cultural problems, boil down to a crisis of saints? That people are not living out the sources of renewal that sustained Ireland for centuries and made Ireland the place of a factory of great sanctity, great scholarship and missionary activity known all over the world?
Well, you see, I think, in a certain, I put it slightly differently. I would say that it is the loss of the language of the spirit in Ireland that has been the most damaging thing. I've written a book, which I haven't yet published yet, called Men Without Chests, about this very thing. How did it happen that we lost the most important, vital aspect of ourselves, which are the sense of our transcendent natures, and that was lost to culture, and it became implausible and almost ludicrous, in our culture. It became easy just to dismiss. And I think that's what we need to start thinking about. We need to reconstruct our culture around the idea that our lives are given to us, that we have a point of origin and a point of destination, and we're on this path moving through this dimension towards this destination. And that because when you look around at young people, like, they're struck down by things that we never heard of when we were young, like anxiety, depression and things like that. This is the next big frontier in our culture, and nobody's paying any attention to it because we're still hung up on this idea of being fashionable. And of course it is. Secularism is fashionable and atheism is fashionable. These are hugely destructive forces of the human in our culture. And but I'll say about St. Patrick, people in Ireland and I think in America are not aware of a very important thing about St. Patrick. St. Patrick did a deal with God by which it was agreed that St. Patrick would be the judge of the Irish people on Judgment Day. I don't think people, if you actually watch Irish people on St. Patrick's Day in Ireland, staggering around the place, I don't think they know this. They need, they need to start reading up their history a little bit.
There's a very funny parody video by a group called Lutheran Satire called Bad Analogies from St. Patrick. I'm going to post it at patrickcoffin.media. You'll enjoy it very much. John Waters, thanks for being a gift. Keep cranking out this high-quality writing that you do. The website is johnwaters.ie, correct, for folks who want to find out more?
To be honest, it's not really up to date. But in my articles, you can get on from things, First Things at the moment. I've done quite a few. I write a column for them every fortnight, and I do other pieces as well. So
great.
That's my main base these days.
Say hi to Rusty Reno for me.
Sure will.
Yeah. Okay, John. Well, thanks a lot. Your lips to God's ears, and we'll see how many folks we can get this interview in front of the May 25th vote, which is my wedding anniversary. So, and once the dust settles, we'll have you back and talk about more things. You're endlessly fascinating. I learned a lot today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Patrick. God bless.
All right, you too. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?